Ryan, just before we came on, you were telling us about Sam Harris's most recent podcast, which is amazing, and I think you need to share this.
Oh yeah, so his most recent thing, I just listened to it. It's like a 10-minute little mini episode, and it just kind of, if you just want to understand what's bad about Sam Harris in 10 minutes, just go listen to this. It's just a little 10-minute episode. It's called A Few Points of Confusion, and he basically, the nutshell, the thesis is that if you meditated like Sam Harris, you would understand why he's right about free will, why he's right about ethics, why he's right about identity politics. Everything comes out of just guided meditation. And
he also slams 99% of the people that listen to his show on that in the beginning. He's like, it's like 99% of the people I talk to don't understand meditation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If you only understood meditation, you'd understand why he's right about everything.
Which is funny in at least two ways. One of which is that it's a pretty sharp turn from his usual strategy of arguing that like objective, rigorous science proves that he's right about everything. Meditate until you realize that he's right about everything.
Yeah. I mean, he even kind of digs on like philosophers and scientists with, like, he mentions free will. He's like, there are a lot of philosophers and scientists who agree with him about free will, but they don't have the courage to say it because they don't meditate, I guess, or something. So I don't know.
Well, he says that the philosophers of free will don't have the courage to come out against.
Yeah, he said essentially there's a lot of people who don't have the courage to say what he says. I guess because they don't meditate. I don't know.
Well, that's kind of the thing he gets into with free will, right? Is that like it does. Everyone's afraid that not having free will will mean that, you know, our society pretty much crumbles. So everyone's being dishonest about it. It's not that people believe differently. It's that everyone's lying.
That's right. Yeah, they're all dishonestly motivated. Which, I mean, we'll get into this. There are legitimate versions. It happens in free will. This happens in ethics, and there's other stuff too. There are legitimate versions of a lot of his arguments, but he just has this general thing of not engaging honestly or authentically with the arguments in a deep way. But,
Ryan, are you a compatibilist?
I am a compatibilist, yeah. So I'm personally offended by Sam Harris.
Sam Harris doesn't
like it. It's because I'm afraid of what will happen to society, so I just lie and pretend to be a compatibilist.
But it's the peasant fear that, you know, incompatible is right about free will determinism.
Yeah. Deep down, I know that Sam Harris is right, but I just can't admit it. I don't have the courage.
Which is also the preferred rhetorical strategy of, like, you know, alt-right, you know, guys who like live in their mom's basement and post all day, you know, that like, look, everybody knows deep down I'm right about the white race, you know, being threatened, but like, you know, nobody has the balls to say it.
That's right.
And the other way, of course, that's funny about, you know, is that Michael Brooks not only was very serious about like he went on meditation retreats. He actually was briefly a meditation teacher at one point, you know, before he sort of started doing, you know, like podcasting, joined the Majority Report, all that stuff. And in fact, I think he and Sam Harris actually shared a meditation teacher. But somehow or another, you know, in all the effort that he put into meditating, he didn't get like a Satori insight of how Sam Harris is right about everything.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, he was meditating wrong. He didn't understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There are plenty of philosophers who are into meditation and have come to different conclusions than Sam Harris about these things. It's
and people make fun of Marianne Williamson for her new agey kind of approaches, but her political takes and conclusions are far, far superior to anything Sam Harris comes out with. At the end of the day, they're doing the same kind of like self-realization, you know, self-help things, which is not necessarily wrong. I'm sure meditating and doing all those things are probably good for your health. But it's like the Jordan Peterson stuff. You know, you stick a bunch of like very, you know, useful life advice that, you know, tidying your room and having a shower are probably good ideas with a political message that is complete, which is not really connected to it, but it gives a kind of intellectual and spiritual depth to like really dumb ideas.
Yeah.
So give me Marianne Williamson any day of the week, because at least she has good political takes. Crystals.
At least Marianne's crystal balls are telling her to support Medicare for all and, you know, oppose war in the Middle East.
I'm not in the Middle East. Yeah, exactly.
So I will take that any day over what the insights that Sam Harris is apparently having in meditation. Although, since you brought up Jordan Peterson, I think this is as good a time as any to acknowledge that the title of this episode and that website that we're briefly going to do does involve some poetic license. I think if you look for it a few years ago, when Jordan Peterson was just starting to blow up, and he went on Harris's podcast. It's a pretty minimalistic thing not to be wrong about, but credit where credit's due. Harris is not wrong about it. He spent 2 hours trying to explain to Jordan Peterson that things can be objectively true even if they're not useful, and vice versa. It was a very I've never felt so sympathetic to Harris. He sounded like an extremely patient and long-suffering, underpaid adjunct professor trying and failing to get something incredibly basic through to the world's most confused undergraduate. So, fair enough. He's right.
There's a graphic from his conversation with Jordan Peterson that I just saw that I was gonna upload and then I didn't have a chance to. But it's Jordan Peterson looking angry, and it says Sam Harris is wrong, and he's just and I wish we had known about that while promoting the beginning of this episode.
Fair enough. That said, even if it's not literally wrong about everything, he is wrong about an absolutely astonishing variety of things. I think that for the sake of doing this right, we do need to start with IQ. Do you have that clip, Forrest?
Yeah, 1 second.
So this is from a debate that Harris did a few years ago with Ezra Klein, who I sort of feel about Ezra Klein here the way I feel about Sam Harris listening to Harris talking to Peterson. Klein is, I think, a fairly annoying kind of centrist wonk. And I have lots of problems with him on lots of subjects. But in this case, Klein spent this 2-hour conversation trying to explain why Charles Murray, who famously asserts in the bell curve that there's a genetic explanation for black-white IQ gaps. To be fair, he and his co-author Edward Hernstein don't quite say that, but they go right up to the brink, point at the implication, and sort of dance around it. They say, well, we are asserting that there is this gap, and we are asserting that there's no social explanation. So, and of course, this is just part of the larger claim of the bell curve that there are genetic explanations for economic discrepancies in general, right? Murray and Hernstein, also think that poor white people are genetically inferior. But there is the most famous chapter of it where they extend this to race. And Harris is trying to defend Murray as just this scientist who's going wherever the data leads him, and is being persecuted by SJWs for it. And Klein, I think, is trying to explain to him that this is not actually where the data leads at all, and that this is and that Murray is nothing like a neutral scientist. In fact, Murray spent his entire adult life, more or less, in right-wing think tanks. He's not a scientist. He's a right-wing political polemicist, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with being a political polemicist. But, that's just a very different thing. This is everything he says is completely motivated by that. And so it's most of this discussion is Klein trying to argue about the substance of the issue, and Harris complaining about being that you're not allowed to say these important, you're not allowed to disagree with the consensus about it. So you want to do the clip?
Difference.
Sure. Many things are possible. We're trying to judge on what is plausible to say, and more important, I am worried about the social penalty for talking about these things, because again, it will come back to us on things that we don't expect, like the Neanderthal thing, right? Like that comes out of left field. Had it gone another way, all of a sudden we can't talk about Neanderthal DNA anymore. And there's no point in having our politics be hostage to these kind of tripwire effects where you say something that seems politically invidious, merely talking about the data as they are. I mean, unless every population of human beings has exactly the same mean and the same variance for every trait we care about, we are guaranteed to be blindsided.
So, thoughts?
Well, it's classic Sam Harris in the sense of throughout that entire interview, he's saying, you know, none of this stuff is connected. So the science of IQ is not connected to social policy. And he kind of backtracks as well. If it is connected to social policy, I don't want to see it contribute to social policy. But, you know, the science of it is its own thing. And Charles Murray's, you know, work in IQ needs to be taken from his work in social policy, and they're separate things. So it's kind of separating everything out to like such a nuance. Not nuance, but like, I don't know, such a vacuum point, I guess, that it becomes
yeah, he wants to pretend like all these things are super compartmentalized. I mean, he in this last thing I just listened to, the few points of confusion thing, when he's talking about identity politics, he wants to do the same. He always wants to do that same kind of move. Like, well, we can, we should, he argues we should just, it's a mistake to identify with your race in any way, and we should just pretend race doesn't exist. And then he's like, I know a bunch of people out there say I'm a privileged white guy to say this, but if you meditated like me, you'd see that identity doesn't matter. So,
and
yeah.
One of the points I'd make about his use of talking about, well, amongst all population groups, are we saying they're all the same? Well, that's actually quite a sneaky way of putting it, because Murray is talking about constructed racial groups. If we want to talk about human population groups, within the African continent, you have the most variety of human genetic diversity. Skin color, which is what people are talking about when they're using this concept in the West, is not the same thing as talking about different populations around the world and if they might have different traits. So we're seeing two concepts being elided: population groups, and then this notion that skin color somehow is a marker of whether you're part of a population or not, which is extremely misleading, because we can talk about biological diversity amongst human populations, but those populations are not the populations that are thought of politically when we're talking about race in the United States. It's something totally different. And as I said on the get-go, if you want to talk about genetic variety amongst the human population, the African continent, among the black people in the African continent, are the most diverse people, because, of course, human populations that spread out from Africa early on were less diverse, and there's less variety amongst those groups. So it's a very sneaky way of aligning two very distinct questions, one scientific and one which is the social construction of race.
It's really interesting that you opened with that quote, because he's responding to Ezra Klein, who's pointing out that James Flynn had just said to him that it's entirely possible that the data that they've collected is the 10-point IQ difference that's being talked about reflects a 12-point environmental difference and a negative 2-point genetic difference. That is, that black people, this constructed group, is actually genetically 2 IQ points smarter than the rest of us, to which Harris says, sure, many things are possible. We're trying to judge on what is plausible. So he just discounts that possibility as implausible from the get-go.
Yeah, and he also, by the way, there's a great thing where they go back and forth about it a couple times about since James Flynn was in this incredibly important, intelligence researcher, who actually died quite recently, and a very interesting guy, by the way. He was an old socialist. He was actually, his academic training was actually in philosophy, but then he made these like universally widely recognized, contributions to the science of intelligence, crucially about this effect whereby IQ, which people treat as if that IQ score represented this immutable genetic thing, actually goes up across all populations, over time as people encounter more complex information, etc., suggesting that it's like way more mutable than was previously thought. And in the stuff leading up to that clip that Mark is talking about, they go back and forth about what Flynn, what the significance of the Flynn effect is, how that might be related to this. And Harris repeatedly accuses Klein of misunderstanding Flynn, and Klein actually gets to do the Annie Hall, Marshall McLuhan thing and be like, well, actually, I just spoke to Flynn on the phone day before yesterday, and this is what he told me. And in a very in-character thing for Sam Harris, even that doesn't faze him.
He probably meditated on it. Had a direct experience of what Flynn actually thought.
That's the joke that this a similar joke to what Michael said when this whole thing dropped, and he was like, he's meditated enough to have some kind of like psychological connection to Flynn where he knows actually what he meant in that phone call, and didn't say.
Well, Flynn probably wasn't courageous enough to say what's on everyone's mind.
Yeah, Flynn's not a meditator, so of course.
Well, I mean, I think the most interesting part of the Ezra Klein thing is, he spends like an hour doing this, but breaking down psychologically, I guess, why he believes that Sam Harris is perfectly willing to accept everything that Charles Murray says about why he wrote the bell curve, and why he's not willing to accept, the weight of American history, and kind of the bias that he has towards, anybody talking about identity must be trying to lie and deceive the science, and and how Sam Harris's own experience as someone that that feels aggrieved and feels maligned, how that bias creeps into all of these interactions.
Yeah, for sure. And it also really strikes me that the stuff that Ryan was talking about for the podcast, where he was talking about identity politics, that in combination with the Ezra Klein debate, I mean, it's pretty incredible that I think that Harris manages to get everything that somebody might mean by the word race as wrong as you possibly could, because of course, because in reality, if by race you mean a biological distinction, then it doesn't exist. It's bullshit, right? If what you mean by race is an identity category, in other words, a way that people are, seen by themselves and others and thus mistreated by others, then it absolutely exists, right? That as a, biological distinction is kind of worthless, right? As a social distinction, it's obviously incredibly historically important, and in ways that that like Charles Murray, who he's defending there, is just astonishingly silly about. If you read Nathan Robinson has a really good article from a few years ago in Current Affairs called "Why Charles Murray is So Odious," where he talks about how Murray will say with a straight face that 80 data started in the 1970s can't be affected by racial social disparities about race, because by the 1970s, right, by 10 years after we ended legal apartheid, then that was just completely irrelevant to what anybody's life experience or opportunities would be.
That's about when we fixed racism, right? 1970s, yeah.
Yeah. Instant post-racial society right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he brings up, but what about this IQ data that we have from Africa? So that's not going to be affected by the history of Jim Crow and all that, which, one, there's very little, right? It's incredibly little data there that you are to have to begin with. And two, so in the Congo, where the Belgians would for a long time cut off your hands if you as punishment if you tried to learn how to read, there's nothing there that might be relevant historically to to education levels or anything like that, and Murray literally does actually this is much worse than the bell curve. He has a book called, I think, On Human Excellence, where he measures the amount of number of inches in the encyclopedia devoted to people of various races, which he thinks proves something or other about innate abilities. Oh, and by the way, says, because he's talking about like various contributions to excellence in that book, says that, classical music counts, but for some reason that I at least wasn't smart enough to get, jazz and the blues don't count, as far as sufficiently, artistically important contributions go. So all of which is just to say, I mean, I think none of this is exactly scientifically rigorous.
Yeah, and I would like to see Charles Murray go to the jungle in the Congo and manage to survive in a society that is an oral society, remembering all the things that you need to know to survive in that jungle. It takes an enormous intelligence to be able to live as a hunter-gatherer, far more intelligence than I think you need in your daily life in the United States, where many of the creature comforts of life are provided for you. So, look at the mode of production and the lifestyle of those people that, if you're not smart and you're not careful and you're not wise, you die.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also
just all the data we have about how IQ is affected by just a wide range of inputs that are often invisible to these kinds of readings. I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but like, for example, if you're tired, if you're worried about something, those things all can affect how you do on an IQ test. Your willingness to engage in the IQ test game in the way that the IQ test taker wants you to engage in the game. All these things are variable, and they're variable in ways that both culture and material conditions speak to, and which Murray just completely ignores, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
I mean, also, just as someone who is like claims to be super rigorous about like the scientific process and the scientific method, for like Sam Harris, like, Charles Murray is not. Charles Murray is starting out with a policy idea, like the policy idea that we need to cut the social safety net. Like, that's the one thing that's motivating Charles Murray's research. So then he's going and he's finding, statistics and facts in these books that prove in the end that we need to cut the social safety net and these differences in IQ. That's not following the scientific method. The scientific method would be that you don't have that original, idea that you're cherry picking all that data from. And so for Sam Harris to like bend over backwards to defend Charles Murray and say, oh, the policy implications don't matter. Like, they literally do when that's your goal.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I think that it could be the case theoretically that, like, in his attempt at arguing for his preferred policy conclusions, he came up with, something that actually did have, real evantial weight. It just seems to be the case that that's not true in this instance. Yeah. But I want to. This is very far from. And of course we should say, because I'm sure like there's nothing like, and I understand this is unavoidable for this episode, because, fish got to swim, birds got to fly. Sam Harris fans have to cry, out of context misinterpretation. So there's no avoiding that. But just to head it off in this case, I think a lot of what he has to say about this, is, well, Murray, is, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. I think he's just a scientist trying to figure this stuff out. He shouldn't be maligned in this way. So I think probably it's been a while since I listened to that conversation with Ezra Klein, the full one. So I think he probably does leave himself points for plausible deniability for how much of this he's asserting. But even if that's the case, right, that's still like, he's still very wrong about it, right? Like in portraying this as this like scientifically rigorous enterprise for which Murray is being unfairly maligned.
That's right. Yeah. And like I think Forrest was saying earlier, I mean, just you see his biases there. Like Harrison, like the fact that he is so sympathetic to Charles Murray. He definitely, I mean, and Klein points that out in the debate, like you have your own kind of identity politics here. Like there's a reason you keep being really sympathetic to these other white guys who are getting critiqued for saying shitty things like this. You're identifying with them and more than you are.
Well, actually, and he has an amazing response to that because he says, no, that's not identity politics. It's just that my experience telling me,
Yeah, that's right. It's just my lived experience. It's giving me information about what it's like to be this kind of person. What is that?
Exactly.